Music is all I think about. From the moment I wake up in the morning to the moment I fall asleep at night.
It's very interesting because it makes it seem like it could be a good or a bad thing to sort of follow your passions and say, this is what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to do this or die trying, to kind of quote 50.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what was maybe that moment for you where you came to that crossroads, and how did you sort of like beg up the courage to keep going, maybe against some pretty big adversity?
I'll tell you what, I was lucky enough, young enough to be fearless. And I had a grandmother my grandmother used to pick cotton. My grandfather used to pick cotton. Like, hey, whatever you doing is way better than this. And we want to make sure that you have every opportunity. So sometimes you take that with you. You say, hey, I want to make sure I do them proud. And so whether I land over here or over there, wherever, I know that I've done what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to pursue whatever dream I was. It's like I wanted when I was a kid. You know, I'd be doing stand-up comedy in the 5th grade for the high schoolers, things like that. So they knew that I had something that I wanted to do, and my whole community was like, man, we're gonna be here to help you. And if you bump and fall your head, we'll be here. So, you know, so I never think that it's a wrong thing to ever give up on your passion. I think that's the wrong thing. Don't give up on your passion, no matter what it is, no matter how old you are, you got to go get it.
No, I agree with that one. And I think there's just countless examples. Like, Ava didn't pick up a camera until she was 32. Alan Rickman got cast in his first movie in his 40s. And so, yeah you're right.
Rick James didn't have his first hit till he was in his late 30s.
Exactly.
You know, Denzel didn't have his big break till he was in his 40s.
Wow, yeah. Yeah. This is true. Bringing it back to sort of one of the themes that's in the film, which is this idea of getting in the zone. Obviously, when Joe gets in the zone, that is that moment of sheer bliss where you are doing your passion and you're doing it at the highest ability and living in that joy. And I think if I were to make a guess, I would say it was probably every moment that you were on the set of Ray, and everything that followed up to that is like an in the zone moment. But do you have any others where you were just like, you knew you were in it and you're feeling your juices?
Ray was just amazing for what it was and what it was at the time. You know, it was a movie that wasn't really done at a movie house. It was sort of independent, but Ray definitely stopped by on that. Like, when I say his spirit stopped by on that, and that's what you get. Like, or being in the zone, there's nothing like being in a stand-up comedy zone. Like, I've been in some zones. Now, have I captured it yet? On film, that is the ever fleeting thing for all comedians. Can we capture that moment where we're killing and everything is going our way? Because a lot of times when we put the camera on and then we're going to shoot the special, it becomes sterilized. And so it's like you cook some of the nutrients out. So looking forward to getting back out doing my stand-up and getting into the zone and letting some of these folks know.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that too, because I think you wear so many hats: musician, comedian, actor, producer, and all these other different things. I think folks forget that like stand-up was like that first thing that sort of brought you onto the screen, especially those young folks.
Yeah, so I got to remind them, like, you know, I know they think it's some of them out here, but boy, hold on. You hold on a second. You hold on a second.
I'll
tell you right, you just hold on.
Well, it's funny though, because it talks about the audience, and there's going to be so many of them that, you know, maybe, especially with these young kids, it's maybe the first thing they've ever seen you do. So I'm just curious, what takeaways do you really want to send the audience home with? Because there's so many messages you can pull from this. That's the great thing of what Pete and Kemp did. But I'm just curious what you're hoping they take from it.
You know what? Don't underestimate some of these kids. That's what I had to learn. Like, you know, sometimes we were like, oh, the children want to drink milk. But what I learned was any kid that's 5 wants to be 10. Any kid that's 10 wants to be in high school. Any person in high school wants to be, you know, beyond college. So our kids now are a little more savvy. That's why I think it's great what Pete and Kemp did, is that it pulls you along a little bit. It gives you an opportunity to see things that my kids have been asking me about, man, since they were 5 or 6. Where do we come from? What do we do? I never get sitting in it's kind of freaked me out when my daughter was like, God is here. She was in her little car seat. I was like, where is he? And, and she was talking about God or whatever that it was. And she said, the devil's here too. I was like, I almost wrecked. I'm like, what are you talking? So she has these, and all the kids, they have these questions already about what it is. And so I think this is wonderful that they're able to see something entertaining and sort of allows your mind to expand a little bit and think and have a good time as well.
I love it too. And again, with someone like you that's had like a career in so many different lanes, you have an audience that comes from you from totally different places. But I think this is definitely a film that no matter where they found you, whether it was in Living Color or, Collateral or the Jamie Foxx show, they're going to find a place here. So on that though, going back to the Jamie Foxx show, if he, your character in that one was going to make a jingle to, get people snapping their fingers about soul. You got any ideas on where he would go?
Don't be left out in the cold. On Christmas, make sure that you watch Soul. So don't be left out in the cold. Soul.
Oh my gosh.
And that comes from, you know what that comes from? I've been listening to Frank Sinatra. Like yesterday, we was listening to Frank, like on our show, we do like a playlist. And so somebody was like Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra. So we was listening to Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra. So that's where that came from.
All that stuff is in your body.
No smell, no taste.
Or touch.
Well, first I have to say what's really interesting about it. I mean, Pixar does what Pixar does. They always move us. They always make us cry. But this film in particular really sort of poses this question of whether or not your passion can always be a good or a bad thing. Like when you're faced with the choice of paying bills or going on that next audition or continuing to follow your dreams. So I'm just curious, as someone who has been, I'm sure, in that position once or twice, when was the moment that you knew, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to do comedy. This is it, make it there or die trying kind of thing.
Yeah, I think for me, when I moved to Chicago in 1992 and found the world of improv comedy and met almost all of my dearest friends for my adult life, that was like, oh, I found my spark. This is what I want to do. And I think I would have kept doing it. I ended up being able to do it here on a big level, but I think I would have kept doing it if I was still living in Chicago and running a little theater out of my basement. I would still be doing it and I would still be content because it was about being with those people and creating something out of nothing with those people, and being part of that community is what is sort of most important to me about it. So I definitely think that was my spark that I found. But and I do think that, the movie takes it a level deeper and that they talk about like, okay, if you have a passion, but also don't let that passion consume you and trying to find balance in life, which there's no greater cure for that than having children, because children will pump the brakes for you.
Wow, I love that. And also it's good that you brought up the improv point, because I wanted to bring up one of your improv sisters who's also a mom. And I'm sure she chose to do Inside Out because it's like, okay, I got to make something for my kids. And maybe that was part of this one too. But are you going to have a little rivalry? Because, could be Oscar nominated Pixar films. You could top her, Are y'all going to like have a little war for which one of you has the best Pixar movie?
No, there's never war. There is only love. But I am like, so I was in Disneyland, I was going to say not that long ago, but obviously now it was pretty long ago. And I was taking pictures of Joy around the park. And I was like, you're in the parks. Cause I'm a big parks nerd. And so no, there's only love. There's only sisterhood.
Friendly rivalry. We'll just put it that way. Friendly rivalry, right? For the two Pixar princesses.
Sisterhood. Just pushing rivalry.
That's what we do at Rotten Tomatoes, right? Okay, back to the film though. It talks about, getting in the zone, right? Where you feel like you're clicking and everything is just hitting perfect and you feel in Zen. I'm just curious, like, what's your Zen moment? Was it playing Sarah Palin? Because it was a big Zen moment for me, let me tell you.
That's so funny. I think I've said that looking back on, I call that that little window of time, a prayer for Owen Meany moment. Have you ever read that book where it's like this weird thing that happened that he somehow his whole life had prepared him for this weird moment that he didn't expect. And again, going back to the sisterhood, that I rode that, 8-week cycle with Amy Poehler. It did feel at that time of a little bit of like, oh, was our whole life leading to this perhaps? And now, of course, here we are 12 years later, and we've had a lot of life after that moment as well. But
some great life. I mean, honestly, I would just have y'all host the Golden Globes every year if I had the choice, which I totally don't. But, if they want to ask my opinion.
I think we're back.
I know. But I'm saying in general, I would just have y'all always do it. Like there should never be an off Amy Tina year is my point. Ever. And then also there's such a big part of this movie that's music. So I would ask you, and I know this is hard for people that love music, but is there one particular song that moves your soul that in like the darkest moment of like, I don't know, but you have to put that on and it makes you happy?
Oh my gosh, there are many. Have you seen that recording that's been being floated around from the movie Sister Act? But it's the little boy singing Oh Happy Day. And it's the most incredible vocal. And it's the most uplifting. It's the best. It's the best song.
Yes, it is. It's Whoopi Goldberg is playing Stacey Abrams, and she's conducting the choir of mail-in ballots. And then the boy is like, Democratic voters in Pennsylvania. It is literally like perfect synergy. And I will just do a quick plug of this to say that Rotten Tomatoes, we have a podcast called Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong, where we go back and look at a movie that for some reason maybe had a poor score, but that has become beloved. And we did Sister Act 2 back in The Habit, because it is a travesty that is only 17% of the tomato meter, but is literally the soundtrack of my adolescence and one of my all-time favorite movies. So trust me, I was all about that video. I was like, look, you should watch we talk about how great it is. Is there any, obviously you're a Parks head, obviously that makes you a Disney head by default. Is there any other dream Disney project that you want to do? You want to do a visual album like Beyonce? I'm sure they would let you do it.
Disney visual album. I would like to live in the Haunted Mansion. Is that possible?
I would too.
We could make it like a Tilda Swinton kind of art piece where I'm just in the Haunted Mansion for like a couple weeks.
Disney, green light this, please. A dark haunted mansion with Tina Fey, Tilda Swinton. I'm going to add in some Donald Glover in there just because I like seeing y'all together. Anyway.
Score for the Haunted Mansion by Donald. We got it.
This week,
what is it?
151,000 souls going to the great beyond every day. The count's off.
Hello, Miss Angela Bassett.
Hi, Jacqueline.
I just like hearing you say my name. Well, ma'am, first, let me go ahead and say congratulations on the film. It is incredible. It is beautiful. This movie is so interesting to talk with artists about because it's a movie that really sort of puts on sort of like, I would say like a case against whether or not your passions are always good or bad. Because although we love them and we live for them, there comes a moment, I think, with every artist where it's like, is this going to be what I'm able to do to pay my bills, even though I love it? And I think everybody comes to that crossroads at a certain point. And I'm just curious if in your history before you became the Angela Bassett, if you ever had that gut check moment and how you decided that this was what you wanted to do.
I never actually had it it didn't resound in my ear that loudly, but because, for myself from inside, because I had it from outside. My mother on one hand, those mentors, those important people in your life, my mother, my aunt, these two very strong pillars and women in my life. My mother was like, go for it. Oh, you were wonderful. And it was dramatic when you did this and that. And my aunt is like, don't waste a Yale education on theater, which was a statement that I remember to this day. But you also get those other lessons. You don't want to live to regret, so here I am, you weigh it. Okay, I can always go back to school if my dream doesn't, fulfill itself, then I can live someone else's dream of me, and that just seemed like a roundabout way to live life. So I thought, go for it. Be smart about it, become as, do all the studying that you can to support and undergird this frivolous affair you're about to journey, you're about to go on. But you want to rise to the top, and be among that, that small number, that number.
Well, thank you, Miss Angela
Get a
Bassett.
shot.
Yeah, I was gonna say, thanks for this advice. I'm writing this down as we speak for how I'm going to conquer the world of writing. So thank you for this very great advice. I'm going to take that to heart, do it, but smart. I will also say though, too, that, I'm glad you made this choice because we would have been deprived of Stella and your performance as Tina and you in Black Panther. And so I'm so glad you went this way, but I'm just curious, what was the performance where you felt you were in the zone like you are in the film? Because I would have to think it would have to be what's love got to do with it? I don't know, maybe Waiting to Exhale. What's your in the zone moment on screen?
Absolutely, Tina. Absolutely. I mean, there are some moments where you are physically in pain, but you are just spiritually filled. It's channeling through. You give yourself up to the moment. Can you go a further distance to get a little bit more piece of information or knowledge that you need before you sleep? Then you go, So that allowed me to be even freer, because I felt like, everything that I could get, every moment awake, I got it. Then I could allow myself to be free, So absolutely that.
I love that. And let me just say, just watching that puts me in the zone. It feeds my soul. So I'm so glad it did the same for you doing it. This movie definitely talks about how music and just artistry in general and finding your spark is the food of life. That's what you live for. And I'm just curious if there's a movie or a piece of music, or what do you do to feed your soul? What's the record you put on? What's the movie you put on for that?
Oh, I'll put on music. I'll put on some jazz. It doesn't matter as long as it's a classic. Miles Davis, The Nearness of You. Guess Who I Saw Today? All of these artists they're looking at their life and then they're channeling those hurts, those joys, that love, that loss through this music, and it has an ability to draw us in and touch us and speak to us and get us there emotionally when we need to be. There are times when I've been waiting to go on stage and I just listen to music and turn off everything else. And the music is like a ride, and it takes you, it gets you right, on the path to where you need to go before you step on that stage. So I'll do that. Or it may be some Anthony Hamilton or some Raheem Devon or something,
Yeah, love it.
To just make you just feel in the groove, in the zone, in the groove.
Is this heaven?
No, it's the great before. This is where new souls get their personalities, quirks, and interests before they go to Earth.
Well, first of all, congratulations. The movie, it's so touching and beautiful and musical and just this, I think, celebration of Black people in art. So thank you all so much for making it. I cried.
You did?
Yes, it was so touching because especially as someone that lives in entertainment, and I'm sure you can appreciate this with your long history of acting and theater and everything else. It's it really does put you in that position of what you love is what you live for, but it can be a good or a bad thing sometimes. There's always that moment, I think, with artists where it's are you going to make it? Are you going to keep going on the next audition? Are you going to keep trying to pursue this path? When a lot of people, unfortunately, your character telling them hey, you gotta pay the bills. So just wondering what would that moment for you, if there ever was a moment where you kind of had to say, I got to keep going because I know I'm going to do great.
Well, I always knew I had to keep going because it is what I do and because it's what's in me to do. And I thank my mother for showing me that. My mother, Vivian Ayers, is a poet. So I grew up with a poet. And she was not nationally known, but she was very disciplined and committed to her work. And in being that way, she really provided everything we needed as young developing artists, all the classes, all the exposure. And it was never about whether or not we were going to make it, it was about giving yourself to your work, because your work is important and this is what you do. And this is how you honor your work, by giving yourself fully to it. That's the ethic that she taught us. So making it was, I don't know if I've made it. It's just it's, but you never know. You just don't know.
Well, can I just say, between you and Sis, y'all made it. Let's talk about it. If that ain't making it, I don't know what is. But it talks to, I mean, like, great. Obviously, you grew up in an artistic household that I'm sure was full of music and dance and all of those things between all of you, and have continued obviously with that. But I'm just curious, and I know this feels like trying to choose between your favorite child, but is there a specific song that you just put on and it really moves your soul? Because that is a part of this too. Like music really, I don't know, like giving you lifeblood.
Okay. Smokey Norfolk. Yes. All right.
Everything, or which particular though?
Everything he does, but this song, I'm going to run this race. Okay, see, even thinking about it sets me off, because the musicality of it is so strong to begin with. What he's doing on the instrument, on the piano, is just so powerful to begin with. The lyrics of the song are piercing and uplifting to the soul. And his voice, my gosh, this man's, his vocal strength and flexibility and the earnestness with which he delivers this song. Okay, you hear me talking about this, you see how I get.
Yeah, it moves your soul, literally. Like, I feel it coming through there.
Yep.
And I guess that's the transformative part of art and music in general, is because it can do that. It can like touch you in a way that is like intangible, but you can feel it. And like, it's that thing that, and when you're doing it yourself, it's like what they're doing in the film, like you get in the zone. And I'm sure there's like a ton of moments where you've maybe been in the zone, but is there one that you can like think back to and you're like, yeah, girl, I knew I was hitting it, every mark, every line I was serving? What was your in the zone moment?
When you're working, you can't assess what you're doing in that way, because if you do, you're not really doing your work. But I'll tell you this: there've been a few moments that were actually transformative. One was in Terrell Alvin McCraney's Head of Passes. There was this moment where I felt like breath and wings literally lifting me up, literally. And I thought that I was going to come off the stage. And that was, you see how I get when I try to talk about it. You can't always articulate these things.
But that's the best part. Like, that's why we watch it, because you don't need to articulate it, because we saw that grace and beauty.
Can you help me get back? Come on.
This won't be a disaster, that's for sure.
Loved hearing your voice. Love that you were a part of this, because it is just such like a musical Black experience of life. And I just love that they just assembled all my favorite artists to like come in here and make it happen. But the film really posits the question of like, what you love, is it a good or a bad thing? It can sometimes be something that's destructive, but when you have a dream, you have to pursue it no matter what. So I'm just curious, when was that moment for you when you knew, I'm gonna be the greatest drummer ever or die trying? Because you are.
You know, oftentimes I think people don't even realize that creativity is what saves their lives. There's a story that I tell in my book about how I was supposed to go to Juilliard, but then I also got a record deal at the same time. And, you know, it was my dad's dream for me to go to Juilliard, because, of course, every parent wants your son to go to this conservatory, that sort of thing. And in my head, I was like, well, wait a minute. Why do you, like, instead of me being the guy that plays for this orchestra, like, why can't I be the guy that hires that orchestra to do it for his own records? And, you know, what's weird is that I joke, but it's actually true. I kept the roots from my dad until like our second album. So how I was able to pull that off with the first album is kind of amazing. But this was always my dream, you know, and for me to, oftentimes we put our dreams to the side because we're people pleasers, and we're managing other people's happiness and not our own. So it was I'll say those first 2 years was hard, like sneaking out the house and, where are you going? A friend's house? And, you know, meanwhile, I'm like making my record. But I will say that this film in 2020, especially where all of us are in terms of finding new creative ways to make ourselves happy, like this couldn't have come at a better time. And yes, even in the film, I've learned lessons about following my path and my own happiness. And I'm personally not the same. So I'm just very honored to be in a meta film that taught me the lesson as I was teaching the lesson. So
I love that. And I just have to say, from your book, between the Prince stories and your dad's stories, they were two of the most funniest things in that book. And I also got my look too. Moving back to what you're talking about with the music though, because the music in this is absolutely amazing. And I feel really awkward asking you to pick a music that moves your soul, considering that you've made so much. And I know that you're a complete audiophile, and it's probably like picking your kids, but maybe you can give us a quick, maybe top 3 of that song that like in the pit of despair. Yeah. Or movie. If you want to do a movie, even better. But I was going to ask you what music moves your soul, but if you got a movie that moves your soul.
Oh, music. You know, man, that is like picking my favorite kid.
I know.
I will say, I'll say that so one of the creative things that I did in quarantine, sharing music is probably like the thing that I did the most quarantining, between DJ and making playlists to keep people calm. So I actually made on my Spotify, like my 100 favorite albums of all time. So I will probably say that the 1976 live album called Person to Person by the Average White Band was an album that really, that was a transformative stage in my life, even to the point where my first day on The Tonight Show, the drummer of that band, Steve Ferroni, mailed me the exact snare drum from that set, from that album, from that Soul Train episode that I saw him drum on. If that's not paying it forward, I don't know what it is, because like that snare drum made my life. So yeah, for me, I will say Person to Person by the Average White Band was like, that live album transformed my life as a 5-year-old.
I love that. Before I leave, I have to I'm going to do a little bit of a name drop, because you have the chance right now on Disney Plus to top Beyonce and Lynn to bring fire music to the Disney Plus platform. I'm just curious, are you texting Lynn like, I'm coming for you? I know y'all broke the internet, but we're about to with Soul.
Yeah, well, you know, even see, I'm Team Hamilton too, so it's like, yes, I will gladly take 2/3 of that glory, you know.
Don't worry, you can't crush a soul here. That's what life on Earth is for.
First of all, let me just go ahead and say congratulations on the film. It is truly incredible, and that's saying something considering this is Pixar, and they've been wrenching laughs and tears out of me since childhood. But I'm just curious, and I want to start with you, Pete, about tackling this particular story, and when did y'all decide that you wanted to give Pixar and Disney their first sort of Black-centered animation, and when and how this all sort of came about?
Yeah, the African-American part of it sort of evolved with the process. We were talking about souls. Where do we come from? Who are we at the core of who we are, our personalities? And we were looking to build a story around a person who had this passion, the love for something. And we, after a bunch of experimentation, we hit on a jazz pianist. And that seemed like, okay, if this is, one of our consultants called it Black improvisational music. Yeah, and we thought, okay, so this main character should be Black. That seems like the right thing to do. See, it would feel weird otherwise. And that's when then we reached out to a lot of other people to try to make sure it was authentic. That's about when Kemp came on. We had the great Dr. Janetta Cole. We had some amazing consultants from the music world, including like Herbie Hancock, which we're like, how did we get to be in the same room with Herbie Hancock? This is insane. So it was a process of, like, you know, as the story evolved, we sort of grew into it.
Yeah, and Kemp, I'm going to you next because Pete said it incredibly well, but it's true. This film is unbelievably, like, achingly authentic. I mean, look, the plot point in the movie, I'm not going to spoil anything, is a brother trying to get a suit and a fade. That is like, you have to know it, you have to live it. So talk about, I mean, sort of how you approach that from a screenwriting standpoint. Was this a minute where you're like, all right, every page, we got to make sure we put a little New York, we got to put a little jazz, or did you really just try and just make the characters as real? Like, but how did you do it? Because again, it's by design. That's no accident.
Right. I mean, well, it was just important that the characters be recognizable to me. You know, I'm from New York. So, and if the main character is supposed to be my age, from the same city as me, for me right then, it's like, well, there's certain things that are just fact that have to be a part of this guy's life if he's actually from the same city as me and is the same age and is the same race as me. And that's not saying that the experience of all Black people in New York is the same. It's just people can tell, I think, in the audience when they're watching something, if someone like them had a part in bringing it to the screen. I know I can usually tell. So it was just important that if Black people were 5% of the audience or 55% of the audience, that they just recognize themselves and what they were seeing up there. Thankfully, though, the burden didn't just fall to me. I mean, of course, you know, you do the best that you can as a writer. But as I said to Pete and Dana early on, you get 20 Black people in a room and ask them what it means to be Black, you're going to get 20 different questions. So I really enjoyed that aspect of collaborating with not just consultants externally, but also internally at Pixar, because there's a lot of folks who I think in their day-to-day in their jobs, they're very good at their jobs, but they don't have an opportunity to kind of have these vigorous debates and discussions about like the authenticity of certain elements of a character or of a world. But it's funny that you mentioned like the suit and the fade, because that was one of the first things that I brought up when, you know, the plot point of him getting the suit was there when I got there. And I was like, well, he needs a haircut too. They're like, well, a haircut's not as important as a suit. I was like, the hell it isn't. I said, if I couldn't have got my barber on the phone to get me a haircut, I wouldn't have gone to my interview at Pixar. You know, so like I said, I had to get lined up. And I was like, trust me, people will believe that if this man is like, I'm not doing anything without my hair done. So it was very funny. But of course, that's a starting point and it's fun. But then structurally, it has to be sound. The great thing about Pixar is this is a house of like incredible world storytelling and world building. And you're working with creatives like Pete and Andrew Stanton and Lee Unkrich and all these incredible master storytellers. So I like the challenge of just not having like, oh, well, we should just put this in there because it's Black. It's like, no, it has to make sense from a story and structural standpoint. And I think when you can walk that tightrope, the result can be transcendent. That's why I'm so proud of the film that we came up with, because I think it's both universal while at the same time being very specific and very authentic.
I love that. Look, you did an incredible job, and I'm sure everyone, including myself, is obviously glad you're a part of it. But in my personal opinion, you earned every inch of your paycheck by just making sure they got that haircut, because that is literally what I'm using as the tagline of this movie when I tell it to people, because that is a big question about it, is the authenticity of it. Everybody always has that question whenever they're seeing themselves represented in a big way on screen, and there's a lot of big players. That was the way it was with, Disney's other films like Black Panther and Moana and Coco. And luckily, we have this great, rich history at Pixar and at Disney of y'all doing it incredibly well. But I know a huge part of that is making sure you get the right lead character. So Dana, if you could maybe talk about casting Joe first, because Jamie's Jamie, but this is like a toned down version of Jamie Foxx that I think a lot of people, I mean, I don't want to say that in a bad way, but it's like he's almost in service to the story, but he's so much in service to everyone around him.
Yeah, you're right. It felt like a no-brainer to us because he's an amazing dramatic actor. He's a comedian. I mean, he's hilarious. And he's a musician. Like I actually didn't know until we spoke with him on the phone the first time that he went to music school. And I knew he was a musician, but I didn't know he was a pianist. And so it just felt like the shoe fit from day one. And luckily he was so excited about the project. So it just worked out really well. And we feel incredibly lucky to be able to have him as our main character.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely hilarious in it. And it has to play like the straight man, and a lot of it is the absurd things come around him. And even though he's hysterical and has his own thing, he does it so well, which I think is a mark of why he's such an incredible actor. But when we talk about what's around him, we're really talking about this cast. And yes, you guys assembled an amazing cast of everyone from, adding folks like Questlove and Daveed Diggs. But I really want to talk about the women that are around Joe, because I got to speak with them this morning. We're talking Phylicia Rashad playing Libba, and then we have Angela Bassett as Dorothea, and of course 22 with Tina Fey. And I want to talk with you, Pete, about just sort of assembling the cast to go around Joe, because they're huge parts of how this movie plays is who's going to play off of him. Yeah, absolutely. And in a sense, Joe is a bit opposed by his mom. Like, she's a bit of the antagonist. And so we needed somebody who could do that in a loving way. She's always out for his best interest. But look, this guy has been trying for a long time to cut it as a musician. She just wants to make sure he's going to have food on the table. So, we needed somebody who could really give him the strength of, hey, move on, but also in a loving way. And so, obviously Phylicia Rashad, her acting chops are second to none. It was so fun being in the room when everybody, we were backstage at D23, and where we met her really for the first time. And everybody in the cast, like, no matter what they were doing, they stopped. And everybody looks over and wants to talk and see what's going on. Even people from other movies were stopping and coming over from Star Wars and stuff. So that was fantastic. And of course, as you say, Angela Bassett brings this incredible strength as well to the character of our band leader. She is got this strength and ability. Like, when she speaks, even as a director listening to her, when she says stuff, you're like, oh man, you totally believe her. You don't mess with Angela Bassett. Yeah, I did want to talk about the New York of it, because obviously a huge part of this film is that it's based in New York, and it's obviously very centered in on jazz, where New York, it was born. But when I was talking to everyone, the cast, who a lot of them are New York residents, went on about how authentically they were able to capture New York in the storyboards and in the production design. So I'll start with you, Pete, and then maybe Kemp, if you could follow up on how you were able to make it, because it's a different look for Pixar. I would say that.
Yeah, thanks for noticing. That's really cool, because it was one of our explicit desires to make sure that this film, you couldn't replace an image from Toy Story or Nemo or something. It's got its own look. We always are sticklers for research. We did a ton of research. We went to New York. We took tons of pictures. The production designers were all over, like making sure that, okay, if this is supposed to be Midtown, what's the kind of architecture? What are the building materials? What are the things that are going to make it recognizable, but not like a photograph? Because, you know, there's certain things we had to change, like the names of shops and the specificity of certain buildings. But, you know, we're trying to kind of grab an essence of this that people recognize right off the bat. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it was really important that New York is 5 distinct boroughs. And it was important that people from New York recognize that, like, where Joe is in Queens, I used to live in that neighborhood. So, you know, it should be recognizable as Sunnyside and Jackson Heights. And without even someone telling you, you know that that's the 7 train on that elevated track. It was actually funny when we released one of the first, I think it was one of the first trailers, right, Pete? Mm-hmm. And Tina Fey actually messaged us. She was like, when the 7 train went behind Silver Cup Studios, she was like, you know, it brought back memories of all the years I worked on recording 30 Rock in those studios. So that's what I mean. It was like there's certain iconic shots of New York that you think of, like the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, but it was so great to get those iconic shots that are only iconic to a commuter from Queens. You know what I mean? And it is. They're iconic to us, to someone coming from Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx. We have our own iconography of the city. And it's in the roads, it's in the shops, it's in things like that. I just, the sequence when we go into the subway is one of my favorite in the whole film, because I was like, man, it's almost like you can smell that subway station and when they go down there. So they really did a great job.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because that's actually one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is the whole subway section. As a non-New York resident, but as someone that goes there very often for work, the subway is really the most common thing about New York for me. It's kind of how I got around. And it is both the blessing and the curse that it is in the movie, of the, like, yeah, you're going to get to see some of the best musicians in the world literally playing in the stop. But then you're also going to wonder, what is left on the seat and why is it wet? Why is that person talking to themselves? You know, there's all of that. And again, it sort of centers in on the authenticity of what you guys were able to sort of create with this cast. But looking at it from, I guess, a wider scale, going back to the look of it, even to the character designs, because I don't know the name of this. I apologize. I was an art history major, but there's these old pictures of Black jazz musicians in like trumpets, and they're elongated and they have that. And I felt that in this. And so Dana, I have to ask you, was that like part of it from like the first draft, that you guys were maybe, you know, doing a little crib sheet on those? And tell me I'm wrong, you can.
We looked at a lot of old photographs, to be honest. Our art department, I mean, it's amazing what they present before they even get to the actual drawing of characters. It's like they go through all kinds of reviews with Pete and Kemp of just kind of like what that look is going to be. And we did really want a stylized look and pushed look for these characters. So you definitely picked up on it for sure.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, again, it's a different Pixar film, but it still has all of the heart to it. But it's also a different Pixar film, which we'll probably see some more in the future. You guys had to finish this while in quarantine, correct? Like, you were still in post-production when we sort of shut down. And although I'm so glad that audiences are going to get to see the film this year, it is the Christmas gift that we need in 2020. I can think everyone will agree to that when they see it. What was it like having to finish a movie in quarantine, Dana? And what were some of the challenges y'all had to kind of overcome?
We had 7 weeks left of production left when we went into shelter in place here at Pixar, or in the Bay Area. And so honestly, I think Pete, Kemp, and I looked at each other and were like, see you in a few weeks, a month. We were so naive, clearly. We're like, oh, this coronavirus things, we'll see it in a bit. But we really didn't know what was going to happen, if we were going to finish on time. But it was miraculous. Everyone picked up their machines, took them home, and started working. Within a couple of days, they were being productive. And I think the hardest part is that our crew, a lot of people haven't even seen the film. We haven't seen each other, but we did finish on time, and we did the mix up at Skywalker in distance, masked ways, and pretty crazy. But yeah, we have amazing people working on the film that finished it. So
That's incredible. I mean, it's incredible to think that you guys finished that. I'm always like, as we are, I learned how to do Zoom in the quarantine really well. We all had to develop new skill sets as we were at home. But in the end, the movie is still the same. It still has that heart. It still has the funniness. It still is entertaining for both kids and parents, which I think is, again, the reason why it should get out there as quickly as possible. Bringing it back to sort of the other huge part of the movie, which is the music. And you guys really did assemble an all-star team to bring not just the music that Joe is playing, but the music that surrounds him in the film. So Kemp and maybe Pete, if you guys can talk about the musicians that you all employed outside of the ones that you put on in the cast, you guys put some other ones behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, the music is really one of the highlights of this film for me. I mean, Jon Batiste, I'm going to let Pete get into Jon Batiste a little bit more because he had an impact, I think, on our whole crew. I mean, I can't speak positively enough about just like his energy as a human being. Just like in his, he should be like the global ambassador for jazz music because the guy he's a student of the music. He's a polymath. He can demonstrate different jazz musicians through history, their style. Like you say a name and he can play their music on the piano. And I think I hope that this film demonstrates to audiences a lot more of what Jon Batiste is capable of, but we really couldn't have had a better. And don't forget, Joe's hands in the film are actually modeled after Jon Batiste. So we jokingly say internally that Jamie Foxx is Joe's head and Jon Batiste is Joe's hands. So our animators use lots of photos. Jon Batiste has long, gangly fingers, and he hits the keys really hard to the point that his pianos often have to be retuned very often. Yeah, so all of that stuff, when you see the animation of that playing, it's just all like Jon Batiste flair. And then the score, I mean, I was a huge fan of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross as Nine Inch Nails, and of course of their work in scores. So I remember when Pete first brought it up, like it almost seemed like it was a joke. He was like, "What do you think about Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross?" And I was like, "For what?" He's like, "For the score." I was like, "What? That'd be awesome!" Just because it seems so crazy at the time, and that was what excited us because we were Pete was so about like doing new things. I think a lot of people don't know that about Pete Docter, is that there have been sequels to his movies, but Pete doesn't do sequels. Is when he finishes a film, it's funny, I'll bring up something and he's like, "Oh, well, I don't want to talk about that anymore because I did it and I've moved on to the next thing." So Pete's favorite movie is always the movie he's currently working on, even before it's done. And I love that because he wants to do things completely different than the last thing he did. And I think with this film, it was like Pete Unchained because it was like the score, it was like a whole new set of collaborators, of which I was just one. But I think there was a whole new set of collaborators all up and down the chain. And the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, I mean, I love the score to this movie. I mean, talk about, I think it was kind of a stroke of genius to integrate them into this.
We also got to hear Cody Chestnut came into play. Of course, he was in the subway that you were talking about. And, you know, the amazing collaborators that John brought in, including like the great Roy Haynes and, you know, just brilliant players.
I love it. And again, as the music sort of like flows through, it really does sort of like sweep you up and allow you to stay immersed in it. Obviously, that's a huge part of any great animation is having an incredible score behind it. I feel bad asking this, Pete, since you don't want to go back in time, but Inside Out, Soul, SNL ladies talking about our inner emotions and where we are. I'm seeing some patterns here. So I'm just curious, is there a little like, you know, put a little Amy and Tina together, like get them some like rivalry? Like if you get a Best Picture nomination for Soul, it like tops Inside Out just a little bit because they only got a Best Screenwriter.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, obviously I love working with smart people and both of them are just tops. You know, we not only Tina, great performer, but helped out a little bit with the writing too. You know, she came in and did some punch up and man, just what a pleasure to be able to work with people like that, you know.